Localization unlocks so much business opportunity, but many businesses fail to get it right. They spend a lot of money or a lot of time doing it. But not for Love Holidays. They built a translation pipeline that saves them hundreds of thousands of dollars per year, and they get content out in days rather than months. I'm joined by Matt, the lead engineer at Love Holidays, to teach us about this architecture, this translation pipeline, so we can walk away understanding how they do these translations at scale. Matt, thank you so much for taking the time to join us here and teach us about these translations.
Yeah, hello. Thanks for having me. Really excited to be here.
Great to hear. Well, I have a bit of an agenda laid out. We don't need to follow it to a T, but here it is. First, we'll go over an architecture and how you put one together, just so we can get like a high level understanding of how things fit together. Then we can talk about what you were doing beforehand. I know I mentioned that it was costing hundreds of thousands of dollars. What was this translation pipeline looking like before you implemented this automation? And then we can talk about after and actually look at it. I know you have a demo lined up. I'm very excited to see it. And then at the end, we could talk about the results that this translation pipeline has brought you guys. Does this demo or does this outline look okay to you?
Yeah, sounds good.
Cool. Well, I'll stop sharing my screen so you can share the architecture. And maybe before you even share the architecture, you could just give us a high level overview of like what Love Holidays is.
Cool. Yeah, thanks for having me again. And as John mentioned, I am the lead engineer of the content engineering team at Love Holidays. Um, what Holidays is, in a nutshell, is a online travel agent based in the UK. For those of you who don't know, an online travel agent is basically our main offering is packaged holidays. So we bundle up and sell hotels and flights and ancillaries and things like that all together. We do have a small hotel only offering, which compares to the likes of booking.com. But yeah, our main markets are packaged holidays. Um, we currently operate in the UK and a handful of countries in Europe, and our ambition, at least for the near future, is to expand into Europe as much as possible and potentially beyond that, once we've kind of moved as far as we can. Obviously, with moving into new markets, there's a lot of nuance and challenges around, mostly translation. And yeah, as John has mentioned, we've done this in the past where we've kind of tackled it using agencies, third-party agencies to do translations for us, but that introduces quite a hefty time delay in terms of waiting for those agencies to get back to you. The quality of the translations is uh, arguable at best, and yeah, it costs a whack of money as well. So um, our team was basically tasked with looking at least the content side of things. How do we automate and extract a lot of this manual processing away as far as possible? So we went about looking at all the different models that we have for content and where we could speed this up and save costs and things like that, and um, also just take a lot of load off our internal teams as well.
Yeah, definitely. So it'd be fair to say that content is at the heart of your business.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's so critical in terms of how we present ourselves as a brand, how we kind of um, re- reach the customers that we want to be reaching, and things like that. There's obviously with the boom of AI, there's a lot of AI generated slop, as they would call it nowadays, and our focus is on leveraging AI as far as possible, but also ensuring that we're not generating just a bunch of garbage out onto the internet, because we still want to maintain our core focus and our core kind of offering. And yeah, so the content is super critical to that, and we need to make sure that it's like the best quality um, possible, but also matching our brand.
Definitely. So, having said that, can we take a look at this architecture I see you have here?
Yeah, so this kind of hones in on the hotel content side of things. So we use Sanity for just about everything within our business, not just content, but we have configuration and things like that as well. But our hotel content was a unique challenge in that um, we we firstly started off with beyond not just scaling into new markets. We need to look at how do we scale up the English content that we already had to match the consistency that we have internally. So um, we have a hotel content team that are responsible for curating about 2,000 hotels within our system. And that's like our top sellers, like the hotels that we need to make sure that they have the best content possible. um, but 2 or 3 years ago, we they didn't have the capacity to look at the other 50 to 60,000 hotels that we have in our catalog. So we ended up being very reliant on our vendors or our suppliers and the data that they give us in terms of the hotel descriptions and facilities and things like that. And the problem that arises there is that they all have descriptions in different formats. They are inconsistent. They could be outdated. So we needed to kind of synthesize all of that information we have from our suppliers, and using AI generate our own content with the facts that we get from our suppliers, but in our tone of voice, our brand, basically the same way that our hotel content team would go about writing content, but just getting AI to do it through prompts. So they've extensively kind of prompted it to give the best quality and consistency across the board. So this diagram basically illustrates how this is done. And in Sanity, we have these tools for them to kick off the generation or translation of content. And that makes its way into our hotel content kind of suite of services, and that sends whatever sections off into Claude for like generating, or DeepL, which is the API we use for translation. And that kind of once that's done, makes its way back into Sanity, updating or creating documents. So yeah, the generation is one part, but then we needed to then look at how do we generate all of this content into English? And once that was done, how do we go about actually translating that into all of the languages that we're interested in, or like that we need to kind of support for expansion into new markets? So yeah, that's where this sits, and we're closing the loop as much as possible. So this diagram kind of shows previously we had them kicking off these manual requests in Sanity, but we've recently changed this to also be quite reactive to updates and supplier information, so that we can actually have this be running itself in terms of updating data and information and things like that. So um, yeah, that's it in a nutshell.
So we've seen that it looks like there's two stages to the AI here. First, you have the hotels, your suppliers that give you this like generic or differently formatted copy. You used to be bottlenecked by the editors who maintain 2,000 properties, but there was like 50,000 of them out there. So the first step is that you take the supplier information, AI formats it and writes it into like your tone of voice, your style guide, and all of that. That gives you your English copy. And then from there, the English copy can be kicked off to translate to other languages. Is that a correct summary of what was going on there?
Yeah, yeah, spot on.
Perfect. Well, beautiful architecture. Thank you for sharing that. You've alluded to some of this before, but can you walk us through like what the process was like when you were doing translations, but you weren't doing it in an automated way? You were using this agency, spending a lot of money, taking a lot of time, that kind of stuff. What did that look like for you?
Yeah, so this was pretty applicable across the board and not just hotel content. But our organization as a whole was using this third party, and this could be for landing page content, it could be for legal copy, it could be for hotel content. So you can imagine that being quite a big kind of flow of requests into this like funnel where the bottleneck is the agency. So um, we would send off these batches of requests to them in the form of like emails or spreadsheets and things like that, and then wait however many weeks to get that back in the same format. And then the various teams that had sent off these requests would have to kind of cherry pick the pieces of content to put them back into wherever they came from in the first place. So hotel content, for example, we're using a legacy UI to manage all of this stuff before we put it in Sanity. So they would have to kind of pick those things out, find the hotels in this UI. Editing experience wasn't super great at all. And then they would have to make sure that what they're putting back in there had the right format, there weren't errors and things like that. And so, yeah, it was a time sensitive thing, like in terms of it took a long time for them to get back to us, but it also took a lot of time to put these things back into the places they needed to be. And you can imagine with it being so manual, could be quite error prone as well.
Yeah, that is the classic manual uh, outcome there is it's error prone and it takes a long time. If you had to quantify those two pieces, like getting it back from the agency and then being able to load it into Sanity and, take it out of that format and get it live, how long do you think those were taking?
I think, I mean, our first expansion, I think, took over 6 months, which was obviously there were lots of elements to it, but I think the translations alone took at least three months or so from end to end. Um, so yeah, it wouldn't take 3 months to get the translations, but it took take a good number of weeks. And if you imagine we're sending so many requests every week, we'd have to wait that many weeks till we get those translations back. So yeah, it basically was beyond 6 months. And then once we built this pipeline, obviously development time aside, it was basically a matter of 2 to 3 days and getting all of these translations up and running and being reviewed.
That's amazing. And it's gotta be so frustrating too beforehand when you wanna be able to put all these new properties out there, like, that affects the bottom line. Having more properties on your website gives people more places, to shop for, buy more vacations and whatnot, but you have this opportunity, but you can't actually really capitalize on it for, like, another 6 months or so. That's painful.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's basically one of our core principles is like opening as many options to our customers as possible. And if those options that are available, just because they're available, doesn't mean that they're appealing. In the sense that if the content for those hotels is not good enough, then we're gonna be hard pressed to sell that because as a customer, you want to know a lot about your hotel and you want to be kind of I wouldn't say convinced, but you'd want to know what's making up your holiday. And if you've got a 2 sentence long description, that's not going to be a hotel that's going to sell incredibly well. So yeah, being able to improve that content very quickly was just critical. And as you say, opens up so many more options to our customers.
Definitely. Well, speaking of this speedy pipeline, can we, take a look at the new way of doing things?
Yeah, sure. So I'll kind of do a bit of an intro around like our hotel model insanity. Um, we use a separate data set from like our site content in terms of landing pages and stuff like that. Um, but this is like an isolated data set that allows our hotel content team to focus on what they do and what they do best. And that's A, curating prompts for generating the content, and then B, kind of orchestrating the generation and translation of all of this content across our hotels. So this is quite nicely integrated with our internal systems in terms of being able to fetch the hotels that we do have in our system. So they have like this ability to kind of set the ID um, without having to know the ID, so they can search for hotels and stuff like that in here. So if we had to look at this example, we have a couple of sections already generated for this hotel, but I noticed that like we don't have a description here. So we would have a description on site, but as I mentioned before, we'd have the description coming from our suppliers. So the quality of that is arguably not good enough for what we want out there. So we built this tool for them to go and be able to kick off a generation of that particular section. So they can go and say they want to generate something. If they want to, if we say it's Hard Rock Hotel, New York. So they've got this autocomplete and they can say hotel descriptions. So this will be a prompt that specifically targets the description of the hotel. And as a nice to have, they can kind of kick off the translation from that point as well. So once we've generated that content into English, that's where the automated side of things kicks in, where they don't have to do anything else, and we'll just get it into our other supported languages as well. So they can select the languages they want to translate to here. So they kick that off, and if we go back to our original document here, we should hopefully see that we get a description.
Sure. But it's got to go through 2 stages, so there's probably a little bit of a lag here.
Yeah.
Oh, there's one.
So there we go. We get our description, and yeah, as we mentioned before, this is a very well formatted description that our prompt is basically built to kind of instruct the LLM to generate this very structured content. So this is how our hotel content team would typically write these by hand. So as you can see, it's no longer just a couple of sentences. It's like this really well structured, kind of segmented description, which is really great. And we can even go and we track down below like what were the inputs that we used. So you can see this is like just a kind of mashing together of all the data that we had from these two suppliers. And that's kind of the context that we provide to the LLM when we're asking it to generate a new description. So it's grounded in facts that we have from our suppliers, so that we don't get like random hallucinated data in here. And we should see as part of that process as well, because we kicked that off for our other languages, that you can see the drafts created 1 minute ago as well. We have the same description automatically translated into German, and I think should be Dutch as well. Yep.
Wow, this is incredible. And that side-by-side view, do you use that at all? Like, is anybody manually, checking these or comparing it to like the English data, or have you guys, have this so locked down that it's just good to go?
Yeah, I think it really depends on the hotels that are being edited. I think for our long tail of our properties, so the ones kind of towards the end of our like not even top sellers, like towards the end of those being sold, I think we're pretty confident in the way that this works. So you'd even see that there's a setting in here that allows them to control how this document makes its way onto our site. So when we have this document set in auto mode, that basically means when the translation comes into the document, we're actually updating the live document. So that makes its way straight into production. So for a lot of hotels, and especially our newer markets, we're kind of okay with just pushing those straight out, because A, we're confident, and B, we want to kind of expand that reach as much as possible. But for our more manually curated hotels, so potentially within the top 2,000 that we mentioned earlier, but maybe just outside of that, they could kind of set it to a more manual process where we do generate the translation into here, but they can go view it side by side to just make sure that the translation's correct. And if they do need to tweak anything on either end, either the English and then retranslating, or actually just going and editing what has been generated here, they can do so.
And how does that look if they want to make a change to the English version? Are things like manually being kicked off or automated, or how does that work if they want to change the original and then retranslate?
Yeah, so at the moment, they would basically go back to the tool that I just showed you. But as I mentioned, we're kind of continually iterating on this approach in terms of automating as much as possible. So um, the the near future, we're looking at kind of automating the translation as much as possible, because we know for the most part that translations are being generated. We just got to be a bit cautious to not overwrite things that might have been changed in the translated document. So that's where the difficulty comes in, because if someone has gone and edited, especially in a collaborative experience like Insanity, if someone has gone and edited the German, for example, we don't want someone also looking at the English and kicking off a new translation, because that's just going to overwrite what they had before. Um, so it's something we're thinking about, and yeah, at the moment they would just manually kick it off. But um, yeah, the manual intervention kind of starts at entering the automated loop and then sitting on the other side and reviewing the content that comes out.
Gotcha. Yeah, makes sense. So the AI content tool, I feel like a lot of this was created right before we Sanity released the spring release, which had like a lot of the things that may have even expedited the creation of this kind of stuff. Like this AI content tool, for example, it's awesome. Um, Maybe it would have been a candidate for App SDK. I don't know if you've messed around with App SDK at all, but it probably would have did a lot of the heavy lifting for this. So you can just like quickly spin up this use case specific app and deploy it to your Sanity dashboard to give editors this dedicated spot to go. Is that something that you looked at all into doing?
Yeah, absolutely. We've been looking at it in terms of this tool alone, but also thinking about it in terms of the editing experience as well. Is how could we move this into App SDK in a format that kind of simplifies their workflow as well? Right now they have a a very simple dashboard tool that kind of tells them which hotels have gone into drafts, for example, in different languages, so that they can go review that. But that's basically just a very basic list where they can then go into this view and see the hotel and stuff like that. So um, beyond just the tool itself, which is a very good candidate for App SDK, we're thinking about how can we expand on that as well to also take more and more of the laborious things that do still exist in this current flow into like a workflow that they can work with and iterate on. So yeah, we are definitely thinking about it and playing around with it. So hopefully we'll get something out relatively soon. But yeah, exciting thing to work on.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it makes sense when you have these like bespoke editorial workflows. They're very specific to the way that your editors are moving content around. It makes sense to be able to put together a tool that matches the exact way that they're working. And that's where App SDK can come into play. And there's so many other things like looking at this, like Sanity Function serverless infrastructure that was released in May as well, would probably be a good candidate for being able to kick off these translations. And you could even do like cool, you could do this with webhooks too, but filtering to be very granular and when the webhook or the serverless function should execute. So like if you change the body, for example, then retranslate. But if you just change, the title or something that doesn't actually merit a translation, skip it. And I even wonder if there's a way you can check to see if you definitely can, if the translated document was edited. So if you have, say, that Dutch version, it was overridden from the initial translation, then you can prevent retranslating that document because you would overwrite that translation that was done manually, or introduce something to the UI that says like, are you sure you want to overwrite this because somebody made a manual translation. So many different possibilities with this, but even prior to having the serverless functions, app SDK and stuff, you guys definitely clearly made it work. This is pretty cool. Um, Outside of this, which is amazing, there's one more area that I at least wanted to touch on. We're totally great to touch on other areas, and that is launching new domains. I know that you have like different TLDs or just domains when you go to a new market, and you have managed to bring that into Sanity Studio. So you can launch a brand new domain with translated content without touching any code. I know it sounds too good to be true, so that's why I think you have to demo it and show us how this is done.
Yeah, so basically a very contrived example of I've got a version of our studio here with a lot of our more complicated things hidden, just to kind of illustrate how we would set up the site. So our site is basically analogous to a domain that you would have just mentioned. So if we're entering a new market, we'd set up a new site in Sanity here, and this is where a lot of the configuration for that site sits. So we'd have things like what primary domain does it sit under? What is the path prefix? So if we look at Germany, for example, it's /de, and we've got it even goes as granular as defining like the templates that we have for the different URL paths that we might expect. So our landing pages, our search results page, and all those kinds of things. Um, so yeah, if we wanted to spin up a new site, we could basically go in here. We have control over all of the different pieces of configuration we have here. We have site codes. We set the locale, and this is obviously really important to the translation piece we just spoke about, and things like currency and stuff like that. So from within Sanity, once we set this site configuration up in one place, we then have it available like across our studio, in the way that we set up our desk structure specifically, or structure as it's now called. To have this available so we can go and actually spin up pages and templates and the actual site content, from within that. So um, I think there's still at this point small elements of code that still need to be changed to support this. But for the most part, we're kind of moving in the direction of Sanity drives almost everything there is to do with like spinning up a new site, and hopefully in the next couple of launches that we have into new markets, or what we've experienced in the past at least, is every time we do this, we learn what the difficulties are and the different places that we have to touch. So every single time we do it, we've kind of iterated on the approach. So what we see now is very different from what we had 3 years ago, where there was a lot of manual tweaking happening like across the board, lots of code changes and things like that. But now we've just kind of pushing as much of it into Sanity as possible, so that there's hopefully close to zero changes needed in the code, so that it's all just driven from Sanity.
So if you were to launch a new domain and you wanted to launch the domain and then have translated content on that domain, how long would that take?
At this point, I mean, I think our systems that we've set up for translations and the hotel content as well are basically quite free of this concept of defined languages. So as long as we're sending it something from Sanity that is a supported language in the APIs that we use, like DeepL, for example, it will just happily run and push those things back into Sanity. So we just define a new language in Sanity, and we'd be able to go into localized content, for example. And I think I might even have Spain in here as an example. So we could go to a English page, for example, and we could manually kick this off into Spanish. But we've also got like a bunch of webhooks that run that automatically react to changes, or publishes of English content. So um, in terms of manual effort, I mean, it's reduced from a number of months to a couple of days, and we've got bulk uh, we've got the ability to bulk translate as well, which we haven't really put in the format of a tool yet, but definitely something to think about and give to our team as well. So we as engineers are still involved in that process, but it's pretty simple. We can kick off like we want to translate these landing pages into this language, and everything just runs, and we get it in Sanity. So when we launched into Netherlands at the beginning of the year, towards the beginning of the year, it was basically like one one request to our services, and we had 800 landing pages available in our Netherlands point of sale. So that was maybe 20 minutes, that everything was 20 minutes to half an hour that everything was complete, as opposed to 6+ months before.
That is incredible. That is wild. A new domain with new translated content on it, and you're live in 20 to 30 minutes, ready to go. Very cool. So on that note, we've seen the demo and we've alluded to some of the results of that, being able to spin up a new domain, launch content very quickly. Can you touch on the cost before and after when you were using the agency translation service and now when you're using the APIs? And then I think we talked about timeframes too, but just overall, like what was it like before in numbers and what is it like now?
Yeah, so the agency that we used, I think our CTO spoke about this at the Sanity conference a couple of weeks ago. But we were paying them somewhere in the region of 200 to 300,000 pounds or dollars a year, or a year for one of our um, launches. So I think that would have been like our German launch, which is obviously a lot of money to pay. And we found that when we started to implement this automated pipeline, that the the quality of these translations that we have now were as good, if not better, than what we had before. So, um, and if we had to quantify it in terms of like spend on the APIs now, I mean, we spend, I think, close to £10,000 now for a yearly commitment in terms of um, characters and stuff like that to translate. So, and I don't even think we come close to using that. So, um, in terms of the fold change in terms of £300,000 down to maximum £10,000 is obviously massive.
Incredible. And for anybody that's watching, if you want to get a custom demo for translations in Sanity, understand how Sanity can work for your business, especially because I would assume a lot of people are not travel agencies, but they have other use cases out there. Book a demo with us and we can tailor something specifically to you. We also do have native APIs for translations. A lot of the stuff we're looking at today was built prior to our spring release, but we have agent actions, for example, so you can do everything entirely in-house with Insanity. But on that note, I forgot to tell you, I have one question for you that I wanted to say for the end. As somebody who has worked so much in Sanity, I'm always curious how other people think about Sanity and how they would describe it to maybe your colleague or someone if you wanted to tell them what Sanity was about in not necessarily one word or anything, but just in like a simple way. Like, how do you think about Sanity in your terms?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think I never had experience with Sanity before coming to Love Holidays. So I came in working with a lot of people who understood it well and were kind of pushing the boundaries already on the types of things you could do with it. So um, if I had to explain it simply, I would say it's, I mean, it's so far beyond a content management system. Um, for us, it is a platform that kind of drives our business. We rely on it, as I mentioned earlier, for so many things beyond just content. We drive configuration from this, as we saw with the site setup. We have configuration for like services and payment systems and things like that set up in Sanity. So it's kind of like this hub where everything drop not everything, but a lot of things are driven off of it, and it makes it easy to integrate our stakeholders in business to be able to affect change and do things that they would usually rely on engineers to do. But it puts kind of the power into their hands and unlocks engineers to do different, better, like more innovative things. So yeah, I know I know Simon and them use the term content operations a lot. I mean, that's something that we're seeing more and more of as we start to stretch the platform as far as possible. So yeah, it's just a really exciting product, a really cool thing to use, and yeah, we're really excited about it, and we do love it.
Amazing. Well, I'm excited to hear you talk about Sanity in that way. Well, incredible results. I mean, the fact that you're saving hundreds of thousands of dollars a year and you're able to get this stuff out in incredible time, days and minutes rather than months, is such a cool story to tell. And I want to thank you for telling the story, sharing your architecture. This it's all made like a lot of sense. I feel like you're really great at going over what's what and how everything came together. So thank you, Matt, for taking the time to walk us through what you've built. It's really incredible.
Awesome. No problem. Thanks for having me.
Cool. Well, hey, see you, everybody.